You get to redo it. Hey, Genesis family, this is Josh, and I'm excited to join you all on day 21 of our journey to Holy Week. And today we are going to be looking at Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 36. One of the main stories in here being the story of Jesus and Peter walking on the water. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. So Jesus had just gone through feeding the 5,000, so he dismisses his disciples to go and go across the sea. And so it says, after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way away from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. And then when they had crossed over, they came to a land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all the region and brought to him all who were sick. And they implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. So here we get the opportunity to catch up with Jesus. He's just fed the 5,000. And so he sends his disciples across the sea, like we said, and he's up praying on the mountain alone. And the boat is out on the sea, and the wind begins to be against them. And they begin to get into choppy seas. And then they look out, and it's the night, and they look out, and they see Jesus, and he's walking on the water. And as they see him, they're terrified because that's not something that people do. You don't see people walking on the water. But Jesus says, do not be afraid, for it is I. And Peter, I love Peter here. Peter reminds me so much of us a lot of times. We were very gung-ho. He says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water. And so Peter comes out on the boat and he walks on the water and came to Jesus. And I think a lot of times we miss sometimes the idea that Jesus is not the only one here who's walking on water, but Peter is walking on water as well. Only two men in recorded history have done this. Jesus is one of them, and Peter is the other. And what happened here is that Peter stepped out in faith. When Peter had an encounter with Jesus, when he recognized him, even in the wind and the waves and the storm, he said, Lord, if it is you, command me and I will come out. So Peter gets out of the boat and he's coming to Jesus. And he's walking on water, an unbelievable thing. And he gets out and all of a sudden he realizes that the wind and the waves are strong and they're against him while he's out on the water. I don't know if you've ever been out at sea, deep sea fishing, or out on a trip, but if you ever want to understand just how small you are, if we ever want to understand how insignificant we can be sometimes as a single human being, step out onto a deep ocean or a sea that's choppy. You become very aware of how weak you can be, of how insignificant you can be, how little control we actually have over our surroundings and circumstances. And so he gets out there and he's overwhelmed by this. He's overwhelmed by his surroundings. He's overwhelmed by the weather, by the waves. And it says that when he saw this, he began to sink. He took his eyes off Jesus for a moment. He forgot why he was out there walking on water, that it wasn't his responsibility to make himself walk on water. He forgot how he was able to do that. For just a moment, what I love is that we see Peter's response. Peter's response is not to swim harder. Peter's response is not to thrash about. Peter's response is that he immediately cries out, Lord, save me. And what does Jesus do here? We see such a great lesson about who Jesus is in our lives. What Jesus does here is he doesn't tell Peter to learn to walk on water. He doesn't tell Peter to swim harder. He doesn't tell Peter to do any of these things. No, it says that immediately Jesus reached out his hand and saved him. And I love that when I look at that in our lives. What we see here is a lesson on what it looks like to follow Jesus in faith, and to understand that our dependency is completely upon him. See, Jesus doesn't want us to become men and women who are able to walk on water on our own. He doesn't want us to become people who have it all figured out and have it under control. What he wants us to understand is our complete dependency on him. And that in him, we are able to do things that are unbelievable to most. But that the only way we're capable of that we are able to do that, is when we keep our eyes fixed on him. And that it's not a failure of our nature when we can't do things aside from him, but it's by design. See, we were never designed to walk on water. We were never designed to be able to climb over tall waves on foot. But in him, we are able to do such things. In him, we're able to accomplish that. But it's only in his power. See, we step out of the boat in faith. We cry out to him, Lord, save me. But it is him who reaches out and pulls us up. And so we have an interaction there between Peter and Jesus, where Peter is stepping out. I always think it's interesting when we get to the end of that story, Jesus says, Peter, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And I think we focus on that very often. Well, Peter's faith, it lapsed. But Peter's the only one who got out of the boat. Peter's the only one who stepped out. Everyone else stayed in the boat. So Peter gets out. And it's when we get out of the boat that we start to realize that it's not of our own power that we can do things. And like I said before, I love Peter's response here. I think it ought to be our response when we understand our own position among the wind and waves of life, of ministry, or of our jobs, or of our families, of all those things. It's that we cry out, Lord, save me. And Jesus' response is to immediately reach out and take hold of us. He doesn't want you. He doesn't want me to be strong swimmers in the storm of life. He wants you and I to be wholly dependent on him. As we move towards Holy Week, as we get to the place where we celebrate the sacrifice that he made in order to make all of this possible, I want you to think about that. I want you to remember that it is reaching out to him that saves us. It is crying out, Lord, save me. And in those moments, he is there. You don't have to swim better. You don't have to try harder. You have to cry out, Lord, save me, and completely surrender yourself to him on a regular basis. It wasn't a failure on Peter's part that he couldn't walk on water. It was by design that he needed Jesus. When Jesus says, oh, you have little faith, I think a lot of what he's saying there is, I got you. Don't forget that anymore. Keep remembering, keep being reminded that he is the one who holds us up. Continue to live in that. Let your faith grow. I often don't know if it was more terrifying to be out on the water in the wind and the waves, or when Jesus got in the boat and everything calms, to realize that you're in a boat with the Son of God who is over the wind and the waves. I don't know which of those experiences was more awe-inspiring, but what I know is that when you have an encounter with Jesus, you can't help but be blown away by it. And our response ought to be to climb out of the boat. And then when we realize that we're way out of our depth, our only response in that moment is to be crying out, Lord, save me. And then there he is. So remember that as we go on this journey to Holy Week together. Remember that in this season of life, that he is there. Cry out, Lord, save me, and he will be right there. You were not designed to walk on your own. You were not designed to swim on your own. We were designed to be wholly dependent on him. So remember that. Remember who he is as our Savior. I love you. See you soon. The meeting's wrong.